everyone. Welcome to the new Systemic Lives podcast. Sometimes with me, Shila Rashid, and sometimes with Gail Simon. We have the pleasure of talking with some leading international and national systemic contributors about their lives, loves, and what brought them to systemic practice. Do watch on YouTube or listen on your favorite podcast feed. Hosted by Murmurations, Journal of Transformative Systemic Practice at systemiclives.com. If you have any suggestions for people you'd like to hear from, please do reach out to us and let's see if we can make it happen together. Look forward to hearing from you. Welcome to the Systemic Lives conversations for Murmurations, Journal of Transformative Systemic Practice with Everything Connected Press. I am so delighted to be in the conversation with Kaethe Weingarten, who is loved by many of us across this side of the pond and in other transatlantic and international kind of terrains. And I'm also joined by Matt Watson. And before we go to speak with you, Kaethe, I wonder if it would be okay if Matt just introduces himself just for a brief while. Matt.
Sure. Yeah. So Matt Watson. I am a systemic psychotherapist and family therapist working with individuals and families for social care in Westminster. I also manage a team intervening with people involved in gangs, and I do a bit of teaching at the Tavistock.
Kaethe, I hope you won't mind if we start with the story from Matt, by how he came to have the connection with you, and then of course through that you were able to come and do some teaching for us at the Tavistock. But it's a really, I think it's a very symbolic story of something that speaks to something about your generosity, Kaethe. And so I wonder if Matt, if you might want to just say something about your beginning with Kaethe in conversations with her.
Of course, yeah. So like many people, I was really enjoying Kaethe's work and inspired by her writing, and I guess I'd read a lot of stuff around reasonable hope, about your work on sorrow, lots about chronic illness and the way that you use yourself, turning personal pain into public profit, and these wonderful ideas. And I think I'd been struggling really to find ways to make sense of my own experiences, sort of therapeutically, and also to have really useful ideas about working with violence. Mm-hmm. And I was looking for a paper that I thought was a paper called Common Shock, and I couldn't find it, and I messaged through ResearchGate, and I thought I'd get a bot or something come back to me, but I got Kaethe to come back. You came back to me and said, I'm sorry, it's a book and it might be out of print. And by that time, I think I'd already bought it. I'd found it, and so I was very moved that you responded to me personally. And yes, we had a few email conversations backwards and forwards since then. And that's kind of that's the little story of our connection. But I was a bit surprised to have you come straight back to me like that. And it's an amazing book, and these ideas continue to frame all of the work that I do, particularly the work with gangs, but also work with individuals. I find particularly the witnessing models really, really helpful. So that's the little story.
So thank you, Matt, for that. And I'm sure we'll hear some more about, those really inspiring pieces of work. But I'd really like to start by asking you, Kaethe, how you got your name. Where did it come from? Kaethe and then the Weingarten.
Well, um, it's it's not a simple story, um, as I'm sure will uh, come up. My parents were very politically active, and I was named for a German artist named Kaethe Kollwitz. She, of course, is K-A with an umlaut, T-H-E, and I'm A-E, which is the kind of the anglicized version of that name. And she was a pacifist. She actually had a son and a grandson who were killed in World War I and then World War II. She has some extraordinary, huge sculptures in Europe that are kind of both commemorating soldiers who died, but also from the perspective of how important it is to not go to war. Um, and she was a socialist, so she also has really incredible lithographs and charcoal drawings of impoverished people. And the work she's probably most widely known for, but it's not really her best work, are sketches of mothers and children, again, very impoverished people. So my mother was very drawn to her work and wanted me to be named after her. Weingarten is a German name. There are multiple towns in Germany that are named Weingarten. We, on the other hand, are not German. We're Polish Jews on my father's side. And pretty much everybody with the name Weingarten, as far as we understand, was in the 14th and 1500s kind of ejected from Germany, from little villages named Weingarten, and went into pretty much the same area of Poland. So I'm an Eastern European Jew, Hungarian, Polish, Lithuanian, and, and my mother named me Kaethe Weingarten, and my father said, you know what? We're just finished World War II. It is not safe for a Jewish child to have two German names. So they anglicized Kaethe. I was Kaethe for a period of time. And then when I went to, well, I mean, my grandparents called me Kaethe. But when I went to college, there were 5 Kathys in my dorm. And they said, is there anybody who has another name? I said, yeah, my given name, Kaethe. And I've been Kaethe pretty much since.
Oh, very deliberate kind of choice of your name that your mother sort of had about this person who was very important to her. Can
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Can you say something about your parents and maybe particularly also about your mother, something about her and how come these things were so important for her? These, you know, that the artist who kind of was um maybe symbolizing so many different kind of aspects of values. I just yeah, can you give us a little bit of a flavor of what your parents were like?
Sure. I mean, my parents are the children of the 4 immigrant parents. English was not their primary language. In my mother's home, it was Hungarian. In my father's home, it was Yiddish. Uh, they um, they were, you know, as far as I can tell, political animals kind of from day one. Um, my father's father was absolutely political. He was part of a Bund socialist movement, came to this country as a young man. My father was the middle of 5 children, grew up in the Lower East Side, you know, saw poverty all around and him and developed a political analysis. He was a journalist. He started his career, I mean, job really, you know, selling himself as a reporter by the time he was 17 and 18. And we have this wonderful collection of what he calls the kid reporter stories. He was a Dickens, what we call a Dickens. He was a real in your face, tell it like it is, real tough guy with incredible values. My mother also was a journalist. That's how they met. They met at the Brooklyn Eagle. My mother's a couple of years older than my father, and she had a more conventional, she graduated from high school at 16. She won a scholarship to Cornell. She was the first only, person obviously in her family to go to college. And she graduated and she started also working for the Brooklyn Eagle. She was on, now I think would be called the living desk. She was not a political reporter. Both of my parents were members of the Communist Party. They left the party in 1938 when they really felt like they understood what was happening with Stalin. My father left the party when he was 19. My mother was older, and that's a big part of my growing up story. So we'll probably get to that.
Mhm. And how did they kind of decide? Do you know sort of what brought them to migrate? And did they go to America or did they go to other places in between?
Do you mean my four grandparents?
Yeah, yes.
Well, they have very different migration stories. They all came as late teenagers, but with very different paths. My father's father went from Poland. He apprenticed himself to the royal household in Sweden as a baker. And then he went to England and then to the Lower East Side, where he was very active in the bakers. He was treasurer actually of the Bakers Union in New York for quite a while. His wife, my grandmother, my father's mother, went from Lithuania. Then she lived in England for a couple of years with a brother, and then went to another brother in Schenectady, and then on to the Lower East Side, where she met her husband, my father's father. And she had virtually no education. She wasn't literate she was definitely not literate in English, and she was not really literate in Yiddish either. On my mother's side, there's a long, quite wonderful story about how my grandfather got here from Hungary, but basically he had a gorgeous voice and he was training to be a cantor, but he had been sent to a small village in Yugoslavia, and one of the duties of the cantor was to what was called kosher the chickens, which means you cut their throats, and he would faint at the sight of blood. So he realized this was not going to be a working profession for him. He went back to this little village in Hungary. His brother was selling Singer sewing machines at that time and saved enough money for my grandfather to buy a pearl-handled cane, a tuxedo, and a top hat so that he could travel from Hungary through Germany without having to speak. He would have a first-class ticket, which he did until he got to Hamburg. And then he went steerage to Ellis Island, where he began sending penny postcards to a brother on Houston Street. I don't know if you've ever been to the Lower East Side, but that is a long, long street. And he was just going one Houston, two Houston. To his brother, whose last name was Braun, Braun, which is extremely common. But it hit a bar And it was a bar that his brother happened to frequent. So he finally, he got
Wow.
out. So there's that kind of wonderful story. And my grandmother, also, it's a super interesting story, or at least it is to me. Her, my great grandmother Julia's first husband died. They owned a little, what was called a tabak, which is like a little corner store. And she petitioned the emperor to be allowed to run the store because in that era, women weren't owners and they weren't allowed to be in kind of front of house. She was able to, remarried, had two more children, and is that right? Three. And one of the children, a little girl, contracted meningitis. And in those days, you might survive, but you'd have very significant developmental delays, which she did. So they made the decision. I'm not exactly sure why they made the decision to emigrate, but they knew they wouldn't make it through Ellis Island unless they were either in first or second class, because what you had to go through in steerage, there are all kinds of tests, and this little girl would never have gotten through. So they saved and saved and saved, had enough money to buy 6, I think, second class tickets, and came to the United States, where there were 3 older girls, and my grandmother was in the middle. The 3 of them worked in shirt and tie factories. Julia worked as a hairdresser. Her second husband, as far as we can tell, was kind of a ne'er-do-well, did not much of anything. And those women were all suffragettes. So my mother's earliest memory is of walking as a 3-year-old with her aunts and her mother, and grandmother, for votes for women. And that's really important. I have 4 granddaughters, and that lineage is very important to all of them.
Amazing. Can I ask, these stories are very fresh. They're very, these stories that the conversations that you had with your parents. I mean, I don't know if everybody would know that much detail about their,
I'm kind of known as somebody who's interested in all of the details. My mother would be 111, but she has a sister who just turned 101.
Wow.
And my aunt, all of the family memorabilia is coming to me because nobody else wants it, and everybody agrees that I should have it.
You're the sort of the history holder.
I am. I'm the one who cares. Yes.
Yes. I mean, I was thinking along a similar line to you, Matt, and I was really just these people that were that took such risks in a way, but also worked incredibly hard, to make these journeys with their families. I wondered what kind of stories and conversations they were, about these relatives of yours in your family, with your parents, what kind of conversations they were as you were growing up, as a child. Yeah, I'm just kind of interested in what were some of the stories. You've got suffragettes, you've got political activists, you've got people who are right in the throes of experiences that were really that spoke of challenges of those times as well. So yeah, what kind of conversations did you grow up with in your family?
Different ones for the 2 families. On my mother's side, both of my grandparents were storytellers and very happy to answer any questions. And I was very curious about family history as a young child. So there's one object that came from Europe only, on both sides, and I have it. And by the time I was 10 or 11, I knew that I was the grandchild who was going to get it because, again, I was the one that cared about it. So, I just heard lots of stories, and I have lots of stories, and it was just very important to me. My father's father died of pneumonia when my father was 19. So I never knew him, but he had two sisters who were unmarried, and though that there was a family of three, my paternal grandmother and the two paternal aunts, and then my mother's parents. So there are five extended family relatives, and every other week we had Shabbat Friday night with the combined family. So we lived at first we lived in one of the boroughs, and they lived in the Bronx and in Brooklyn. So we came together, and then subsequently, and again, this is part of the family history, my parents, for political reasons, had to leave the city, and but nonetheless, the tradition continued that I was with my grandparents at least twice a month, or all five of those extended family. And we functioned, it really wasn't my father's family, my mother's family. We had five relatives who, we did everything with, spend every holiday with. So, there were always stories, certainly on my mother's side. On my father's side, my mother really helped me draw out my grandmother for her to tell more of the family stories. And I have one very vivid memory of being in the kitchen again on a Shabbat, and sitting at the tiny little kitchen table looking out at the fire escape, and my mother saying, "No, mom," my mother called her mother-in-law mom, "No, mom, you have to tell her, you have to tell her." And it was a story about how when she had arrived in Schenectady, she slept on an ironing board. And my mother really wanted her to tell me about her adversity and the, very difficult life conditions she had faced. And my grandmother was very reluctant, but, my mother was sort of able to draw it out. And I was young. I mean, I was probably 8, 9, or 10.
Right.
Oh, I wonder what kind of impact that had on you, as someone who was very interested in stories, and to hear about your grandmother who kind of slept on the iron board. You,
I mean, the earliest, and I mean, now we're sort of going out of chronological order, but I'm just incredibly fortunate that my parents were just so thoughtful and smart about making connections between my own experience, my lived experience, and the larger issues of social justice of our day. So um, when I was 5, um, my father had done a piece of work, and he, instead of getting paid in cash, he asked for tickets to go on a cruise. So this was unbelievably upsetting to my mother's father. And I mean, he just thought, it was going to be the ruin of our family, that he was taking, whatever the pay was, and squandering it on this vacation. And that was a lovely aspect of my dad. He really had a great capacity for joy, and encompassing joy and suffering, right? So anyway, we went on this cruise, and one of the stops was in Cuba, and I we it must have been very hot. We stopped at a park. I was able to get out and be on the swings. I remember that. Then we got back in, and then we were driving through what must have been really terrible slums, and they just told us what it was. And either my mother or my father said, that you just had this wonderful experience of being in the park and being on the swings, but notice there is no park and there are no swings, and there are a lot of children on the street. So I had that connection. Then we were on the bottom deck. I don't know. I mean, I've never, this is my only cruise ship experience. I know they're layers or levels or whatever. It's called something else. But we were on the very bottom. And but there was I had developed a business because I was very good with maneuvering and knowing my place. And so my business was that if you paid me whatever, 5 cents a dime, whatever, I would take you where you needed to go. And in that process, I met this little girl who was on A deck. And she was having a birthday and she invited me to the birthday. I was very excited. I remember my mother got a present, we wrapped it, and I went up and I wasn't allowed in because I was on the wrong deck. And I remember being like completely devastated. And what my parents said was, well, now you know what it must be like to be one of the children who lives someplace where there's not a park. And you were on, when you went on those swings, you were like the little girl on A deck. But now you've had the experience of what it feels like to be on the outs and not allowed to have something you want. And that was so visceral and connected for me. And I feel like, okay, that's my beginning of, that's my entire history, right in that little anecdote.
Mm. Right from the beginning, really, even with your name.
I'm 5.
You couldn't sort of really escape it in a way. It was very
Oh, I
much.
could have. I could have. I mean, right? I mean, if you're parented in a way that they're not connecting you and loving you as they're telling you that, you could absolutely reject it. But the way they did it, I just felt so deeply connected to them and their values.
Mm. Matt, did you have anything that you wanted to
I mean,
ask?
just reminded me of the story that you tell, Kate, in some of your writing about your parents being taken away at one point.
Oh yeah.
Just brought me back to that, and yeah, an amazing story, and I think I've read it a few times. But it sounds like even before then there were these political, these values that you were getting, as you say, in a very skillful way from your parents. But I wonder if you could tell us that story as well.
So yes, that I am older. I'm not 5. It's 1956, so I'm 9. However, 2 years before, as you may know, the Rosenbergs, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, were, in my view, and I think the historians' view, assassinated. Certainly, we now know that the United States government knew that Ethel was not a spy, although Julius likely was, although a very insignificant one. But they were assassinated, and they had 2 children who were exactly the same ages as my sister and me, Robert and Michael. And I knew they were living initially with people in a community that was very near us. I knew they were orphaned, and eventually they were adopted by the Maripols, and they are extraordinary human beings, and their children are, and it's a very interesting intergenerational story there. Nonetheless, I knew that the Rosenbergs, who were communists, were they were killed at Sing Sing, executed. And I knew that obviously that the children were orphaned. So my parents, as I say, we moved somewhat precipitously from the city. My mother had been on the school board in the little community where we had moved. She had to leave. There were rumors that she was a communist. Things were very kind of shaky. And this one day, it was in June, kind of at the end of the school year, I got off the school bus and I saw my mother in a police car. And she rolled down the window and she was allowed to speak to me. And she said, your father and I are going to go to Washington. You need to just walk home, and your Aunt Molly will be coming from the city. She'll take care of you and Jan until we get home. I don't know how long we'll be there. And I don't know whether or not we're going to be able to be in touch, but you'll be fine. You'll be taken care of. And so they were gone for a period of time. I really don't know how long, whether it was days or I know I'm almost positive it wasn't weeks, but I don't really remember that. When my mother came home, she came home before my father. So she had been interrogated by what we now know as the Eastland Committee. The House on Un-American Activities was the committee for our branch of the House of Representatives. The Senate had its own investigatory committee, and they were primarily interested in journalists, media types, and artists. And as I mentioned, my parents were journalists. My mother had been turned in by somebody who she had been dating before my father. His name was Winston Burdett. And it was clearly a revenge move. My father was 39 at this time. And as I say, he had left the party when he was 19. So that was 20 years before. My mother had left when she was 23. She was 41. So, 18 years. So my mother came before my father, and I remember this conversation very, very well. She said, your father and I were in Washington, and they asked us a lot of questions, and it's a little bit like this. If your teacher says to you, nobody, I'm going to leave the room, but I don't want anybody to talk. If when the teacher's out of the room, some children talk. When the teacher comes back in the room and says, did anyone talk? Do you give names? And I said, no. And then she said, and if the teacher says, unless you give names, I am going to punish all of you, then do you give names? And my mother, is quoted as saying, I said, of course not. And she said, well, that's what happened to your father and me. They asked us to tell on people about things that we don't think are wrong, but they do. And we did not give names. And then they did say to us, because you haven't given names, we are going to punish you. And we don't know what the punishments are going to be, but we have decided that we still won't give names. So I was like, okay, I'm on board. And then unfortunately, my mother said, and you must never mention this ever again. And that part ended up being very complicated. And that really, in retrospect, this is obviously something I've studied and I know I understand quite well, but my father in particular was so traumatized. He was threatened with going to jail, threatened to have both my sister and me removed from the family. His interrogation, which we've read, it's part of the congressional record. He's threatened over and over and over and over again, and he does brilliantly, absolutely brilliantly. And he cites constitutional law and all kinds of, American history and what it means to be a true patriot. But, as we know, if somebody is traumatized, they can hold it. in a way that where they are very threatened by any mentions of it. And he really did not experience or hold it as a matter of pride. And so much so that it wasn't until practically the week after he died in 2001, but before the Freedom of Information Act in the United States was withdrawn, that my sister and I wrote away for my parents' FBI files. So imagine, I mean, we're in our 50s and we are respecting our father's absolute inability to go near, talk about it. But we did get the FBI files. We understood that they were under surveillance. I mean, and they were nothing. I cannot tell you how insignificant they were. Our mail was being surveilled until the late 50s.
Wow.
Sorry, I'm wrong. Into the early 60s. Sorry, I made a mistake. And yeah. And well, you can see I'm sort of and then actually our daughter, when she in the same period, was the one who found his testimony in the congressional record, and we have copies of it. But again, I mean, my sister and I both respected my father's wish, both not to get his FBI file and not to find his congressional testimony until after he died, which was in 2001.
That sounds like a hard thing to hold, to carry. And you, yeah, I just kind of thinking you're a witness at a very young age,
Well,
I guess.
yeah, right,
Witness
right.
to
No,
violence, you know?
no, I mean, for
Violent
sure.
act.
I mean, that I absolutely, I date my understanding of witnessing to that period. And, you know, there is also in the book, which you may remember, uh, that the Suez Crisis happens fairly soon after that. And I was absolutely terrified that there was going to be another, you know, world war. I'd already read Diary of Anne Frank, you know, Jewish child. And I wrote to Dag Hammarskjöld and said, you
Okay.
know, if the UN delegates don't really understand how terrible war is for children, even though I am a very shy person, I will come and address the General Assembly if you think it would help. But my father didn't mail the letter. He was afraid that somebody, some press person could pick it up and then our family would be in danger. So he never sent the letter, but I didn't know that. And I used to go to the mailbox every single day waiting for the answer. And then finally, I mean, two things happened. One, the crisis was, you know, I mean, of course, we're still here. It's not like we aren't in a crisis, but that, which is named the Suez Crisis, ended. And my mother told me that my father hadn't mailed the letter, that he didn't think it was safe. But in terms of witnessing, I will tell you, I think that it was not only witnessing, but also I would never have anybody deliver a letter for me. In other words, the witnessing would have to be mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just apart from you witnessing really some very, very traumatic events and situations, you know, that your parents had to endure. And you know, you were talking about how it was difficult for you to remember how long your parents were away whilst they were being interrogated. And I was thinking in that moment that were you speaking to that child part of you that was really in shock about the loss of your parents and not knowing when they were going to be coming back, what was going to happen to them, and how you've you know you've been kind of exposed to these really life kind of adversities from quite a young age, you know, from the conversations that your parents would have, your mother would have in particular, about adversity and sort of what, and in some ways the privilege that you had, and as
Right.
a way to help you connect with the adversity of other people. But here you were, as a child, experiencing some real adversities, uncertainties about what was going to happen with your parents. And I just wondered sort of how you think, or what helped you to kind of cope with these things. You know, what helped you to, because at the age of 5 and then at the age of 9 to experience something like your parents being taken away, it's a big, massive kind of juncture in your life. And yeah, I'm just wondering what helped you to kind of, you know, manage those times, and how do you think it left you kind of feeling about risk and adversity?
Well, I think the episode when I was 5 was just the ability of my parents to provide a conceptual frame that was understandable to a 5-year-old. It just, I think I was already an empathic and compassionate child, and I can say some stories about that. Um, but you know, I think I was also smart, and the conceptual framing was part of a holding, right? When I'm age 9, I think there, you know, as I say, I mean, for 2 years there had been conversation in that I overheard, or I don't think I was part of, but overheard about the Rosenbergs and what had happened, and maybe even, you know, prior to that, because they weren't incarcerated for the year before. I mean, yeah, I think it was scary, but I don't think it hit home really until my parents, until my mother said, "And we may be punished." And of course, you know, I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. But you know, and I would say that that was problematic, in that there was a disconnection, because she introduced silence, and we know that you know, tons of my work is on political violence. The impact of the injection of silence into a narrative of political violence is what produces, you know, symptoms, or you know, it's a stressor. I mean, let's put it
Yeah,
that way.
absolutely.
And I mean, again, I mean, I think that the witnessing model is I think, Matt, you referenced turning private pain into public purpose. That, of course, is a motto that came out of my experiences with cancer. And that my first cancer experience was 1988, and the witnessing model is actually around the same time. So, you know, there has been an interweaving of the political, or, you know, having a vulnerable body. I was first hospitalized and unable to walk when I was a senior in high school. I was 18. I was hospitalized for many, many months and lost my ability to walk. And so there has been an interweaving of the at this point, given how many decades it's been that I'm alive, I'd have to say chronic illness rather. But you know, managing a chronic illness and managing issues around political violence. But again, I mean, I just feel like connection. As I said, I had 5 very loving extended family members who we saw all the time. My parents were part of, they had wonderful friends, and those friends, particularly the women, extended themselves to my sister and me. I had wonderful friends. I read voraciously. My favorite book when I was in 7th grade was The Psychopathology of Everyday Life. I had a little parlor trick. I
Light
had,
reading.
yeah, but there are a couple of you know, they were like, to me, they were tricks that you could do around memory issues that are in that book. And I used to kind of entertain people with them. So, I read a lot. I made, yeah, what can I say? I mean, I I guess the a more general point would be to say I grew up in a household where there was a seam of silence in a fabric of connection. And it's just not, it's, yes, that seam of silence was difficult, but it was absolutely not dominant. The connections were dominant.
Yes, and of course we know that that also really helps when you're exposed to kind of violence or to trauma, the connections and the way in which those hold you are very significant as they were for you. You mentioned your sister, and I think, did you mention earlier your brother as well?
No, I have an older
just
sister.
have a sister. So were you the eldest, youngest, or what?
No, I'm a younger.
You're
My sister's 4 years, 3 years and 9 months older.
okay.
Important 9 months.
Well, I mean, there is a sort of a little bit of an interesting story in that my father went to World War II when she was 6 weeks old. And my sister grew up in a single parent family with extended family. So we lived very near my grandparents, my mother's parents. She actually had 3 parents. My mother was working full time as a journalist. My father came home. I'm conceived, born a few months later. I grew up in a 4-person family. So actually, we are both firstborn, right? So she's a firstborn in one constellation, and I'm a first child in another constellation of the family. And those 2 families ran parallel for our entire lives.
But your experience of family was different.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, because you were talking earlier about.
Now it's getting hot for people.
I think that's no problem.
Not getting hot here.
It's very cold here, so the heat.
No. I meant this part of the story.
Oh, I see.
Ah.
I didn't mean the temperature.
Okay.
What's getting hot here now, Kaethe?
Sister?
But
No, I mean, I think saying that there were 2 parallel families.
yeah, and I mean, there are a couple of things there. I was really struck by what you were saying earlier about that silence, but then also this kind of sense of something much more kind of unknown and really quite frightening kind of happening, in the background. And despite that, sort of how you also managed to, you were talking about, being part of an extended family, having friends. And you made me think about your father, because you said something about his ability to be joyful and to kind of enjoy things, amidst sort of some very difficult kind of circumstances. And I wonder whether, in some ways, is that part of your father in you? What parts of him do you think you kind of carry? What parts of your mother do you think you carried in you?
I do think I'm much more like my mother than my father. I mean, my father was really brilliant, and he had incredible judgment, and he was pleasure seeking and joyful in a way that is really uh, uh, off the charts and not in my domain. I do, however, have a child uh, who has had, and again, this is in writing, so I'm not saying anything in this interview that isn't known. born with a very rare genetic disorder, in and out of hospitals her entire life. She is the most joyful person I've ever known in my life. She has an ability to integrate adversity, terror, terrifying medical situations, and be buoyant and clear-minded, and she's completely amazing. And she is very joyful. And I do think she has some of my father's sensibility. My father was arrogant. She's not. My father could be difficult for a lot of people. Of course, that's one of one of his talents, really, was to be able to push back and be arrogant. And that's a strand that's not in the family anymore.
Was it necessary at the time?
Yeah, I mean, he was didn't graduate from high school. He was a little punk, pushing his way into, wanting to be a journalist without an education, self-educated. He's in the Navy. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but he also had I don't know if this is it. He had a lot of courage, and he also was arrogant. And sometimes there's a line, that people can tread, where you're not sure whether this is ethical, committed courage or arrogance. And yeah, there's a little wobble in him. And yeah.
It sounds like he had things to be scared of as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. But he didn't face them with fear. He was pretty much a fearless person.
Well,
I mean, that's such an important way of kind of also defending, isn't it, against sort of the vulnerability that you might experience. And I was thinking about your faith, being Jewish as well, and what that was like in that context. Whether was there anything of your experience in those early kind of childhood and adolescence that kind of focused on that aspect of your identity, of your family life? Were there any experiences for you that were difficult as a result of that?
Well, I mean, you can't really be a Jewish child, post World War II and not carry, in, the specter of the Holocaust with you. In my family, we would, I don't know, every year or so, my mother would say, now, if we have to leave, you have to know exactly what you would take in a backpack. So we always, knew. And my mother's father retained his Orthodox Judaism, and I, as a little girl, I was able to go with him. If you're an Orthodox Jew, once girls are a certain age, you sit separately from the men, but I would be underneath, his garments and sit with him Friday night, Shabbat at synagogue, and being with him was really important to me. My parents were atheists. I insisted on going to a Sunday school. The rabbi begged my parents to let me have a bat mitzvah. No. Have a confirmation. No, absolutely not. But there are at best, there are ethical principles of Judaism that were very integral to my growing up, and we were culturally Jewish. We celebrated every Jewish holiday, and I mean, not but that is the case. And it's way more complicated now. I think I don't want to go into all the politics of that, but I I am very, very fortunate to have grown up in a family that had the particular politics it had in relation to global issues.
Yeah, that was sort of there from the beginning. I mean, I'm just also wanting to bring you a bit more into your adolescent kind of years and your early sort of adulthood. Um, and wanting to hear, you were speaking earlier about the books that kind of inspired you, but what kind of culturally, what kind of things were you inspired by in terms of writing, or in terms of kind of songs or plays, or events or experiences that happened? What kind of really made a mark for you? If we were thinking about a 15-year-old Kaethe or a 18, 19-year-old Kaethe, where were you? What were you doing? How did you kind of just be a young
Yeah, the
adult in the
Beatles,
world?
right? I
Yeah.
mean, I grew up in the era of the Beatles, in terms of, popular culture. But I was also sick. I was in and out of hospitals by the time I was a late teenager, and I'd been sick for a number of years. That was kind of mysterious and not really handled very competently at the time. So there was always a strand of, this is odd, what's going on? I'm uncomfortable, I'm in pain, what's going on? I was hospitalized, as I say, for many, many months, from January to May of my senior year in college. I was in a rehabilitation center, had to learn how to walk. Everybody else was in their 60s and 70s and 80s, and I'm 18. In terms of, books that were important to me, you know, it wasn't Jane Austen. I mean, I actually remember reading War and Peace and skimming the war parts and just reading the peace parts. That's really funny about me. Um, you know, I do know that I had memorized a number of speeches from um, some of Euripides, which I think is really weird. So I was reading Sophocles and Euripides as a teenager, and again, I really can't place that very well.
Where did that come from? Those sort of
No,
classic.
that's what I'm saying. I really don't really understand that.
Mhm.
And also I don't understand why I was memorizing how vainly mortal men do blame the gods, for of this they say comes evil, whereas they, even of themselves, have sorrows beyond that which is ordained. I mean, I could go on and on. Why? I mean, I had no idea, but
Meant
I
something.
knew reams and reams of that in translation, of course. Um, I don't know.
I'm kind of thinking, your standard sort of 18, 19-year-old wouldn't be reading those kinds of, books, and of course not be spending the amount of time that you did in hospital as well. So I just wondered sort of how that set you in relation to your peers, and who were your peers, who were your, friends? What did you do to have a joyful time when you weren't in hospital? And
Yeah, well, I was a dancer, and I was a singer, so I was always in the lead in the school play, and or in the Magic Flute, I was not Queen of the Night, I was First Lady. It's a very high soprano part. I had a best friend, and we told each other, everything. I, I, I don't know. I think it's pretty consistent. I didn't have, a gang of 20. I had, a few very, very close friends. So intimacy was really important. I had boyfriends. I always had a boyfriend. My adolescence doesn't really figure that strongly in my life. My childhood does, and then of course my 20s, but I don't know. Adolescence was phase. I was pretty formed, I think, by adolescence.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, you had some very strong kind of messages about the kind of sensitivities and maybe some sense
I
of
mean, actually, I will say one thing. My father was a uh, he is somebody who valued my intellect excessively, and he treated me as his and anybody's intellectual equal. And he would bring home, I mean, he had several friends whose names are kind of household names in this country. And he would say, oh, Kaethe doesn't agree with you on blah, 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 and then he'd turn to me and say, tell him what you think. As if, and so he on Saturdays, he and I would take long walks. He would, talk with me, to me. And when I went to college, and I went to a women's college, uh, I was the only person in my dorm of maybe, I don't know, 30, 40 girls, who felt like I mean, my parents were feminists. They treated me as anybody's intellectual equal, almost my father, I would say, to a crazy, you know, extent. But I was the only one who had that experience, who grew up believing that, of course, I could do whatever I wanted. I was as smart as anybody. They wanted me to go to a girls' college because he didn't want me to be in an environment where men were treated as more important than women. He thought it was essential that I go to a women's college so that I could, be the superstar.
Interesting what you were saying earlier about you feeling in some ways you're more like your mother than your father. But it sounds like the love of the intellect that he had is also something that you took up. That's
Well, my mom we haven't said this, my mother was a novelist,
Mhm.
right? So she wrote, I went to college in 1965. Between 1965 and 1976, when she died, she wrote 4 novels and a journal. She wrote one of the first 3 memoirs of of living with cancer that had ever been published at that point.
Right.
So I absolutely, I'm much more like my mother than my father. I mean, she was very bright. I mean, bright. I don't really think that's the dimension here. She was beloved. Well, actually, I don't think I can use any of these words without saying something about myself. So I am more like my mother. What can I say?
It's there's some humility there as well. You don't want to say any of these words that you think describe your mother because there's something about that connection with you and what you're like.
Well, I've already said I'm like my mother, so I don't really want to describe her.
But it sounds like there were such gifts from both your parents
Yeah.
to you, and the sort of continuation, and you talk about your daughter as well, and sort of her courage and her joyfulness as well. So there's a real kind of continuation across the generations.
Yeah, and I mean, not to be out of balance, I have a son whose judgment is he is not arrogant, but he's very much like my father. He's doing work in a different field, but he's doing the exact same work that well, that's not fair. He's doing work very much like my father. If I want somebody whose opinion I am going to absolutely respect. If I get stuck, if I want somebody whose judgment I can rely on, I call Ben. I mean, both of my children are wonderful people. She happens to have a capacity for joy that is not like anything I'm internally familiar with, but I love being around.
Matt, did you want to say anything? Is there anything that's kind of coming up for you as you're listening to these conversations?
I mean, it's a wonderful conversation. I guess I was thinking again about how you. I remember one time we met, and I think you'd asked people how they look after themselves. And I know that Shila asked you about how you kind of found the strength when you were a small child, and we were thinking about that. But I was wondering, and I hear about your son, I hear about your daughter, and the closeness of the family. But I wonder, it's a complicated world at the moment, right? There's a lot going on. I'm wondering, is that okay? I don't know how far to how present to get now, because I haven't done any of these podcasts with Shila before. But I'm really interested in how at the moment you're managing to show compassion to yourself and continue to witness all the stuff that goes on and stay relatively sane.
So, I mean, there is a crucial person that we haven't mentioned. I've been with my husband, for I'm trying to do the math here. 58 years.
He's a stayer then. You're going to stay with him, yeah.
Right, probably, yeah, at this point. We grew up together, right? I mean, we were kids. I met him. I fell in love with him the first moment I saw him when I was 18. He, of course, doesn't remember me, but he does now, and so do the grandchildren. Recite it, chapter and verse. So, I mean, yes, I think we're a very close family. We've had we've had more than our share of medical disasters. We have, Roadrunner cartoons where people are going, off the cliff and you don't know whether you're going to get pulled back. We are in one of those right now. We've had, for me, it's 37 years of horrific treatments, multiple life-threatening illnesses, which I continued to survive, but with huge challenges. I've been blind for 15 months. I think that's also part of the written record. My husband's had serious life-threatening cancer for 18 years. Our daughter's been in and out in one crisis after another, and we are in one with her right now that may. So the political part has been crucial. Being a social justice advocate is part of how we cope. It contextualizes our own suffering. We know that we are extraordinarily privileged. We have resources of figuring things out. We have resources of connection. We have resources of love. We have resources of stamina. We have resources of having been in this place so many times. We are a well-oiled machine. I, right now, am developing curriculum, multiple curricula for lawyers in this country who are working with, or they represent, unaccompanied children.
Yeah.
Their rates of being able to win asylum if a unaccompanied child is legally represented, they had been during Trump 1, 55 to 75%. It's unclear whether there's any such thing as a child winning asylum in this country. So I am able to say to myself, I am doing what I can. What I can do is develop the resources, curricula, resource packets, exercises, handouts, peer support groups, so that these lawyers, of which this particular group, there are 2,000, I am developing, that's what I've been doing this past month, the curricula for managing attorneys, supervising attorneys, and staff attorneys. I wake up at 4 because I can't sleep because of the problems that we're facing. I work from 4 to 7. 7 to 9, I'm doing family-related childcare, schlepping, whatever, and then come to this conversation. That's our life. That's been my life, for decades. So it's all of a piece, right?
Yeah.
It's a little bit like the 5-year-old, right? I got to swing. And yeah, I didn't get to go to the party. I got to swing.
And there's something about your ability to hold on to that privilege,
Yes.
and be aware of it, and also connect with adversity, in a very lived way too, because it's not that you, through your privilege, you haven't experienced adversities. You've already told us there's so many adversities that you've had to experience, and there have been all of these resources that you talked about. Matt kind of brought you right to the present, but you mentioned your husband as well. He's been your kind of partner for a very, very long time. And I was curious about whether he's in a different kind of field to you or similar kind of field to you, and what you think the two of you have given over the years to your children, to your daughter and your son, about your values, and what you kind of offered together in the way that your parents have offered things together to you.
Yeah, so we moved, we had lived in Boston for 48 years. We moved here. We're in Berkeley, where our 2 children are and our 5 grandchildren are. My husband had been given a prognosis of 2 to 3 years survival. When he hit the 3-year mark, he said he wanted to be, time left with our kids. But also, it was becoming increasingly clear that I was flying out all the time, or not all the time. Every time there was a medical emergency with our daughter, I was flying out. It just wasn't tenable. So we came here. Yesterday, one of our granddaughters spent 3 hours looking through a microscope with her grandfather, as a way, really, both being with him and also containing her distress. And yes, he is a physician. He does leadership training, so he's retired from clinical care, patient care. But he spent probably 30 hours in the last week researching the particular medical situation that we're facing as a family. So he has enormous resources of being able to interpret medical data for us, contextualizing lab data and reports. He's also incredibly kind. He's also a very nice person, and he's emotionally kind of tempered. And there are times when those qualities are very helpful for children who are, erupting and highly distressed. I bake, and that's the other thing. I spend every Friday making challah and some other treat. And now the kids are getting a little bit old, and we have a 4-year-old neighbor, and I'm teaching him how to bake because I have to, that's a very important coping mechanism for me. So now I have Shankar and Bhaskar, my new baking buddies. So, yeah, I mean, I think we both provide different resources. I mean, I'm trained as a child psychologist, kids having a different child in a different family, a fear of being kidnapped or whatever. I'm the one who does the 20-minute interview, whatever, conversation I'm brought in. So, our kids really utilize who we are, what we have to offer. I'm not sure I answered the question. But yeah, I mean, I feel we are both very, very well used. And it's wonderful to be as old as we are and to feel that our gifts, our talents are used by our grandchildren, our children, our neighbors, our friends, and at work.
Mm, mm. That real lived sense of the social kind of responsibilities, but also the contributions, and social justice that you grew up with, are always kind of thinking about people who are less well off than you, as well as, sort of really being a resource for your immediate family. I mean, just very maybe briefly, I'm really interested how you came into psychology. I mean, of course, you are a historian and a storyteller, and loved hearing stories, and you were witnessing a lot of different kind of traumatic and challenging events. But how did you, you know, what sort of drew you to psychology, and how did you also go into then systemic sort of thinking and family therapy?
Well, yeah, I mean that I think I knew. I think I mentioned the Psychopathology of Everyday Life was a book that I read in seventh grade. So, um, I I think I mean, I think if I did not have the particular political trauma history that I had, I would have been, I would have been an out front leader in like the Children's Defense Fund. I would have done something in the political arena, but in fact, I couldn't. I have, I was, my preferred position was always as the consultant to the CEO or the president or whatever. And again, I mean, I do think that certain degree of fear that has to be managed from the 9-year-old on has something to do with that. So, I went to a program called Clinical Psychology in Public Practice, and that's really important because it was not a straight clinical psychology. It was how do we use the tools of clinical psychology to deal with the largest social issues of our time. And that is what I tried to do, including developing the family therapy training program at Children's Hospital Boston, which was the first interdisciplinary family therapy training program they had in the Department of Psychiatry. And it was very much about a social justice work in a community setting. And, I became a family therapist because I was working on an inpatient unit, and there was, a 26-year-old woman who everybody thought was having a first grade schizophrenic episode. And I saw her with her mom, and I said, there's a dynamic happening here, and nobody else saw it. And then my supervisor said, it's funny, I was at a cocktail party with this guy named Carter Umberger. He talks exactly like you do. And he trained with somebody in Philadelphia named Salvador Minuchin. I think you should really talk to him. And that was 1971. So I started family therapy training, apprenticing myself to somebody who had been a structural family therapist. And that didn't work for me for a variety of reasons. most of which in those days I would have named as gender reasons, and issues around power and hierarchy. And then, you can trace the history of our field. And, I consider myself, kind of blending social construction, feminist narrative, but I'm not any pure of those. And, the papers for me that are most important are the 2000 Witnessing Wonder and Hope, and then the paper in Family Process. I think it's called Call to Repair, which is, hugely long and probably 3 people have read it. But I think it's a really important paper.
2 of them are here, definitely.
Well, thank you. 2 of the 3, right.
It's a wonderful paper.
Why do you think those 2 papers were so important for you?
Well, the first one is the first integration, of everything we've talked about, right? It has the family history, it has the medical history, it has the work in South Africa. It's as personal as you can get, I think. And that is a paper that the editor, Carol Anderson, was the editor, and she said, this may be the first time I've done it, but I'm not going to ask you for a single revision. This is going in as is. So, that is a paper that people can read, whether they are psychologists or not. It's written in English. And so it is integrated. And this one in 2022, I also think that the issues of implication and what it means to be an implicated subject is critical for our time. And it informs, I think, every aspect of how I live my life. Do you have Amazon? Do you have Amazon in the UK?
Yeah.
So here's a political action. You buy the least expensive items solely on Amazon because it costs them a fortune to send it to you. It's a really interesting act of resistance.
Lovely. Reminds me of the phrase, what is it? Never confuse small with trivial.
Exactly. It is that.
Yeah.
The small is not trivial.
Small is not trivial. I love the implicated subject. It really helps me so much every day. I think about it a lot.
I agree.
We do a lot about place of race and thinking about privilege.
And just to be clear, that is Michael Rothberg's idea.
Sorry, Matt, did you want to say a little bit more about sort of how it's kind of connecting for you in the present? Because I guess it will be interesting and useful because we've been speaking with you for a while, and to maybe bring it a bit more to the present. But did you want to say a little bit more about how these ideas connect for you?
Love to, yeah. Briefly, I mean, I implicated subject has been so helpful to me in terms of, and the Call to Repair paper, and lots of parts of that paper actually. But I guess in helping me be able to take a position and some responsibility without being atrophied by shame and guilt, So I it's not that I don't feel shame or guilt about things that have happened, but I guess it enables me to better understand what privilege means, i.e. that my privilege is at the cost of somebody else. It's not just the thing that I have, it's the thing that somebody else doesn't have, and that's how I get it. And I'm implicated in everything that's happened that has brought me this. But I guess I'm not responsible for all of those things, but I am responsible for what I do now. So that's how I take it. I'm responsible for what I do now. So that for me is quite a freeing place, and I don't think guilt and shame are fantastically helpful when we're trying to have interventions, interactions, conversations around power and privilege and prejudice, etc. So yeah. But the other thing that Kaethe's writing has done for me is the way that you link the personal and the professional has been really important. My kind of bit of my history was going to a number of people and asking for help and being turned away, which I found very alienating and difficult. And the way that you are present in your writing and the openness that you generosity, as Shila said, in sharing your story, I just found so helpful. And the recognition of what happens to people when services created to help them won't respond to them. That idea of ethical loneliness and moral injury. Yes. These are just such illuminating ideas for me. So I could talk a lot more about it. So yeah, I love it, and I've also want to say that The Cruel Radiance of What Is also an amazingly powerful paper for me.
Mm-hmm. And more to come, hopefully, as well. I mean, I agree. I think there's something about how you have really spoken about, very vulnerable kind of moments in your life, past, present, and ongoing. In a way which comes also from a position of strength, and I think there's something about how you've kind of opened or given permission maybe for people to not see vulnerabilities and the kind of adversities that we face as some kind of weakness, but actually how they kind of bring with them opportunities for strength and to be also giving something back to others. I think that's one of the kind of enduring messages. I think that you seem to be kind of really speaking to in this conversation is how that has come from your parents too. This idea of kind of always being in sight of the other, not just of yourself, and how you're connected with the other, who's not immediately visible to you. And I was just sort of thinking as we're coming towards the end of our conversation, although I agree with you, Matt, I think there could be a part 2 here because there's so many things that have sort of not been as explored today. But already there's so much in what you've said already, Kaethe, as well. But I was thinking about you as someone who's been in the field for such a long time, actually, and has kind of seen so many different developments, in terms of family therapy. You were talking about Minuchin and sort of the, feminism, the sort of gender. And I'm just wondering what your sense is of where the field is now, and if you had some hopes for where the field might be in 10 years' time. Where would you like to see things developing? How would you like things to be developing?
Well, since 2018, when I developed the Witness to Witness program, which is based at Migrant Clinicians Network, I've really been in a educational community or oriented to being able to do my work on a very large scale, or for me, it's a very large scale. We reach 300, 400 people, at a time. And now this is a cohort of about 2,000 lawyers that we're going to be working with. So that's a very, very different scale. And it's very much taken me away from the kind of the academy, if you will, of family therapy or family therapy training. My specific area of focus is immigration. I live in Berkeley. It's a sanctuary city in the United States. We had a near miss last week with ICE and federal, not just National Guard, but federal troops arriving. And I'm part of I'm on the Berkeley Sanctuary City Task Force, and mine is the healthcare one. We have meetings actually today and tomorrow with the people who oversee the Know Your Rights trainings in the various healthcare centers. We're most concerned about the public hospital emergency room where ICE has been entering, and we've already seen a tremendous drop off in our undocumented, unauthorized population not utilizing healthcare services here. So that's a big focus, as well as the work with the lawyers. So I'm not tracking kind of family therapy field, as it were. I'm really, in the weeds on immigration and policy and, moment to moment, what's happening with which immigration judges in San Francisco have been pulled off the bench, things like that. I do believe that in this country, there are ethical challenges that professional organizations in general are not meeting well. We have a president who I believe is seriously cognitively impaired, and I do not believe that professional communities who are in a position to take positions are doing so. I don't think the media are. And there are other ramifications from that. Our country is more and more polarized, and there are ways that our, professional communities could be really speaking to that and doing something about it, that they are not. I think the emphasis on meeting with individuals and couples and families, as opposed to understanding that families are nested within neighborhoods and communities, is problematic for us as a field. So I'm very grateful that I was trained in a public practice clinical psychology program. It's, I graduated in 1974, and I've never, 74, and I've never regretted that was the emphasis of my training. At one point, doing family therapy training or, developing a training program, felt like that was community work, and it is. And I feel enormously grateful that I've had this opportunity through Migrant Clinicians Network to extend even, further into marginalized communities.
I mean, I was just thinking about the parallels here in the UK as well, with the sort of the rise of the far right, the polarities that you're speaking of, the divisions, and of course a huge focus on migrants as being the problem, and that something needs to happen to them. They need to be got away with. And of course in America there's huge increases in the number of deportations as well, and even worse, a separation between children and parents too, which is on a completely different scale. But you made me think about what you were saying, that your hope would be that our communities, our systemic communities, our professional communities would do more, but and say more, but they haven't. And it kind of connected for me about that theme of silence that you lived with for quite a long time, where there's really quite terrifying things going on, but there's also this kind of thread of silence that has to be maintained or is maintained. And I was thinking about how actually there's quite a lot of silence in our systemic communities about a number of things, immigration being one of them, and the rise of the far right, things about Israel, Palestine, things about racism, things about some of the atrocities against women, global majority. There's sort of a whole host of things that are happening. And I was just curious about, as someone who's experienced that kind of that silence and silencing, I wonder what you think is kind of is underneath that difficulty in kind of going from experiencing something, thinking something, feeling something, and going past the silence and being able to say something. What do you?
Well, I mean, yes, I mean, I very much resonate with and appreciate the point that you're making. Um, I at Migrant Clinicians Network, I have had a lot of freedom to work and speak out in the ways that I prefer. At the same time, we have 71% of our funding is federal, and we've had to be careful about exactly what appears on our website, what we do and don't write about, what language we use. And it makes a huge difference if people collaborate on what feels moral and ethical in pulling back, not silencing, but pulling back deliberately in order to act on other values, like protecting people's ability to have jobs, support their families, et cetera. 70% of our workforce is people who are in families that are under siege in one way or another. So I think, some silence obviously comes from people lacking empathy. Some silence comes from people lacking the ability to have an overarching political analysis. And some silence comes because you're protecting, or you think you are protecting, valued goods like position or money or, resources that you want. And that, everybody is making compromises. I mean, Matt, you're speaking to it. We're all compromised, all the time. So, or maybe not we all, I am, making compromises all the time. And some of them are visible to me and some are not. And some I am able to speak to, and some I might if I could, or there's some I probably actually am protecting. I mean, absolutely right now. Yeah, I mean, I've said that we're in a kind of a medical disaster zone, and there are one or two actions that have been taken, like driving when you don't have the right to be in a certain lane because you don't want to be late for a medical appointment. And I didn't do it, but somebody I dearly loved did. And, great, you got there on time. That is a compromise, right? I mean, that's a lapse. Did it hurt somebody? Yeah, probably. Do I know how that person was hurt? No. These are things, we're human. I think somebody, Matt, you might have said, how do you show compassion for yourself? Well, I guess I allow myself a little bit of wiggle room here, not a lot, but a little.
Bit of irreverence,
I'm sorry?
a bit of irreverence.
Irreverence. Well, no, I mean, it's an ethical lapse. I'm really, it's that. And yeah, it is going to happen. And, especially now, look, where I'm not going to a demonstration where they're using pepper spray and tear gas because I'll die. I'm not willing to do that. I will put my body on some lines and not others. Would it be better if I said, no matter what, I'm heading out? Yeah, it would. But you know what? I'm protecting my ability to stay alive. I don't leave the house anymore without 2 days supply of medication.
Wow.
You know, if I'm going to get arrested,
Wow.
I am not waiting for them, my family, to figure out what jail they put me in.
Really? That's what you do? That's what you do?
So, yeah.
That's incredible.
So
I mean,
here we are.
I'm thinking about that push for survival, and and to kind of make sure that that you have the resources, to carry on kind of living. And I was thinking about your parents going through that drill with you, like, okay, if they come for you, do you know what you're going to take in that bag? And I think that that metaphorical bag of what is absolutely necessary and needed in order to kind of ensure that you can live to tell the tale, or sort of at least survive, is a really important one. And what you're saying about giving yourself that leeway, that you have to pick and choose things for yourself, that you cannot kind of do everything, but whatever you've done so far, Kaethe, has been an incredible kind of source of inspiration and courage for many of us, and to kind of keep going. I think there's something about that perseverance, and where you're also kind of still trying to really make a difference to some of the more marginalized and sort of more vulnerable kind of people in our society. And I think that's a real kind of I don't know, maybe something about that sense that you've had from a very young age of the importance of being useful, useful to others.
And the way that your parents communicated these complex, important value ideas with such precision and attention to who you are, reminds me of your writing, because your writing is very elegant. It's very, it helps people to get hold of, important value, ethical, practical ideas for therapists to make a difference. Yeah.
I really hope you're going to write an article about the silence, because when you were talking earlier, and I agree with you, Matt, about the elegance, but there's also something very profound in the way you articulate these very difficult kind of dilemmas, human dilemmas for us. And it really sounded like, okay, I hope that Kate is going to translate that into another wonderful gift of an article for us. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. I just wondered what it was like for you to be kind of going through these different kind of parts of your life and coming into the present.
Well, I mean, this is, very interesting. I hardly ever talk about my childhood or some of the, the early family history. So, that's very interesting. Of course, I see the connect. I mean, it's not like I'm oblivious to the connections, but that somebody would be interested is outside of our children and grandchildren is sort of surprising. Yeah, I mean, it's been a big canvas, I would say. And I am interested that even though I have alluded to there being a current medical crisis, obviously not mine, so much of what I get interviewed about in general is really about my history, the sweep of, or the relationship between the political work and the illness work. And it's really interesting to me that that really hasn't been the focus. So this is a very unusual overall interview for me. Maybe you all both understand why that happened. I don't, but it's very interesting to me. And yeah, I mean, both of you have made really interesting connections. And I assume I'll also have access to the YouTube, so I'll be able to,
Sure.
watch it I'll certainly pass it, to people in my family, and they're not going to watch it, but at least
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed the conversations as much as we have. Please get in touch and let us know what you liked, what resonated for you, and who else you might like to hear more from. Please feel free to share with others in your personal and professional network. Rate this show on your platform, and let's create our Systemic Lives community.